Hello everyone, you are watching the 7th video of Genesis in a Bible study video series. In this video we will go through Genesis chapter 7. Just like I've said in the past, the events mentioned in Genesis really happened. Noah was a real person. If you don't believe Noah was a real person, you may have trouble believing the accuracy of the rest of Scripture. 1 Chronicles chapter 1 affirms he was real. God affirms Noah's existence in the prophecy he gave to Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 54 verses 4 through 10, and what he said to Ezekiel, Ezekiel chapter 14 verses 13, 14, and verses 19 through 21. Jesus, who claimed to be God, affirmed that Noah was real in Matthew chapter 24 verses 36 through 42 and Luke chapter 17 verses 22 through 33. Luke affirmed Noah's existence in his account of Jesus' genealogy, Luke chapter 3 verses 23 through 38. The writer of Hebrews confirms that Noah was real in Hebrews chapter 11. And Peter shows the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 3 verses 14 through 22 and in 2 Peter chapter 2. Genesis as a whole is not symbolic. It is history. It can't be taken any other way without explaining away other parts of Scripture as well. Verse 1 says, "And Jehovah said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation." Verse 1 had me confused for a little bit because of the way that is phrased. Just so no one else is confused, I'll rearrange the sentence this way. God saw that Noah was righteous before him among Noah's generation. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 5, though not in context, says, "And spared not the ancient world, but preserved Noah with 7 others, a preacher of righteousness, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly." Verse 2 continues, "Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee 7 and 7, the male and his female, and of the beasts that are not clean 2, the male and his female. Of the birds also of the heavens 7 and 7, male and female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And of every living thing that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the ground." The word translated as pure in verse 2 means, quote, "pure," in a physical, chemical, ceremonial, or moral sense. In verses 2 and 3, God said to take 7 pairs of birds and clean beasts, while Genesis chapter 6 verses 19 through 20 says to take 1 pair of every kind. When first looking at these verses, you may think they seem to show that God changed his mind, and that the kind theory that I mentioned in the last video isn't true. On closer inspection, these verses simply show that God knew Noah was intelligent enough to understand his last command, and that he didn't need to repeat himself. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 19 through 20, we read that God commanded Noah to take 2 of each kind. Before the ark was finished, God gave Noah general instructions concerning the animals, but specific instructions concerning the ark. After the ark was finished, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, verse 22, his instructions were more precise concerning how many animals to take, but not concerning how to know what kind of animals to take. The reason for this is simple. God knew Noah remembered the command to take 2 of every kind, so now his command was simply to take 6 extra pairs of clean animals. To show that the Hebrew text is general in verse 2, I've used Strong's work as a help to translate the LXX published by Cambridge University Press in 1887. This is the translation. And from the clean beasts lead in to you 7, 7, male and female, and from the unclean beasts 2, 2, male and female. The word translated as destroy in verse 4 means blot out, according to the ASV footnotes. This is the same word translated in verse 23 as destroyed. Verse 5 continues, And Noah did according unto all that Jehovah commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, into the ark, because of the waters of the flood. Of clean beasts, and of beasts that are not clean, and of birds, and of everything that creepeth upon the ground, there went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, male and female, as God commanded Noah. And it came to pass after the 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. Continuing on in verse 11 it says, In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 7th day of the month, on the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The word translated as deep in verse 11 can be used for, quote, an abyss, as a surging mass of water, especially the deep, the main sea, or the subterranean water supply. This is the same word used in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. Strong says the word translated as broken up means, quote, to cleave, generally to rend, break, rip, or open. The word translated as windows can be used for a lattice, a dovecot, or a sluice. All of these are possible and related because they all have holes or narrow passages in them that light, water, and other things could go through. The phrase windows of heaven can also be found in Malachi chapter 3 verse 10. The King James Version footnotes suggest floodgates as the best translation for this verse, which agrees with one of Strong's definitions for the word, which is sluice. There's more than one scientific model for how the flood could have taken place. 2 of the models that I've heard of focus mostly on the, quote, fountains of the great deep. It's possible that subterranean water was the larger source of water, but it's obvious from the text that the rain at least seemed to be an important contributor as well. Before, I thought that Genesis chapter 1 and 7 both seemed to imply that there was some sort of large water supply in the upper atmosphere, or at least larger than there is today. Now I'm not so sure, because of what I've read. I'm pretty sure that knowing Hebrew would help when trying to figure this out. For now, I'm going to leave this subject alone. It is a very difficult subject to try to tackle, especially since I'm not any kind of a scientist, a physicist, geologist, or anything else, and I don't speak Hebrew. I will have a link on my website under the description for this video. If you want to read about it, this long and technical article that I'll link to goes through scientific models for the flood. Verse 13 continues, In the selfsame day entered Noah, and Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, into the ark. They, and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, and every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God commanded him. And Jehovah shut him in. The American Standard Version footnotes says the word translated as sort at the end of verse 14 should instead be translated as wing. Verse 17 continues, And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. And then verse 18 continues into another paragraph, And the waters prevailed, and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high mountains that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. Verse 17 doesn't mean that the entire flood was over in 40 days, because verse 24 says the flood was on the earth, quote, 150 days. Actually, verse 4 in this chapter shows that it was the rain that lasted 40 days, not the flood. Notice verse 20. This verse, when taken by itself, is easy to misunderstand. I don't know if people commonly misunderstand this verse or not, but I did when I first read it, so I want to go into more detail here for the sake of those who misunderstand it. If verse 20 is to be taken to mean that the waters were only 15 cubits off the ground, that would be equivalent to only 27.36 feet off the ground. This is using Easton's sacred cubit. 15 cubits is exactly half the height of the ark. So how could the high mountains be covered in 27.36 feet of water, and why would Noah need to build something that could float? For those of you who read from the King James Version, I want to make a quick note. The hills in verse 19 of the King James Version is translated from the same Hebrew word as the mountains in verse 20. That's why the ASV uses the word mountains in verses 19 and 20. Verse 20 must not mean that the waters were 15 cubits off the ground. By the time of the flood, man had been around for more than 1,000 years. I'm sure that they knew how to build towers and boats after existing that long. Strong says that the word translated as upward means, quote, properly the upper part, used only adverbally, with prefix upward, above, overhead, from the top, etc. There are many other places in the Bible where the same word is translated as above. As far as I can tell, using the KJV 2003 Project's work as a guide, there are only 8 Hebrew words in verse 20. In order, based on the ASV, they are 5, 10, cubits, upward, or I could say above, waters, prevail, mountains, and covered. I distinctly remember reading this idea somewhere, but I can't seem to find any book that mentions this. Maybe this is the meaning. And the waters prevailed 15 cubits above the mountains, and they were covered. This would explain verses 19 and 20, and also explain how the ark could land on top of a mountain, as mentioned later on, that still exists today. This is probably what the translations ASV, KJV, JPS, YLT, and LXX mean, especially when the preceding verses are taken into account, but it's not as clear as it could be in English because of the word order in Hebrew. Maybe a Hebrew-speaking person could explain what this verse means better, but let's move on. Notice the progression of the water in verses 17 through 20. In verse 17 it says, quote, "The waters increased and bare up the ark." In verse 18 it says, quote, "And the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters." In verse 19 it says, quote, "And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth." Some say, similarly to how Haley says in his book, that these verses are perspective, not exact, or in other words, told from one person's viewpoint instead of precisely as it happened. This stance, so they say, wouldn't destroy the account of the flood, and would leave room for what many scientists claim is true. I disagree with this idea, and I believe that, though it tries to stretch enough to fit the biblical account, it fails to match up with what the Bible actually says. Creation scientists have said for many years that there are evidences for a worldwide flood. And there are. Another thing to consider is the text itself. How could a localized flood reach as high as the mountains, especially cover them? How could a local flood destroy man and animal off the face of the earth? Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 and 2 seems to imply that the numbers of men were increasing greatly, and animals had likely increased too. To further prove my point, I've calculated that there could have been as many as 564,950,498 humans born from the beginning of humanity to the time of the flood. This is a very rough estimate based on the information in Genesis and some assumptions that are highly unlikely, although necessary. My guess is that this estimated number is lower than it was in reality, because of the number of children Adam was said to have had. If you want more information and the calculation itself, you can find this in an article on my website, www.dynaglos.com. The article is titled something like Births Before the Flood and is under the topical guide section. Verse 21 continues, "And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both birds, and cattle, and beasts, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, of all that was on the dry land, died. And every living thing was destroyed that was upon the face of the ground, both man, and cattle, and creeping things, and birds of the heavens. And they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only was left, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Notice that it says that everything, quote, that was upon the face of the ground, unquote, died. Noah didn't need to worry about any of the animals that lived in water, particularly the ocean, because enough of them survived. The story of Noah has been used as a symbol of sin and salvation many times. The sins of humanity brought destruction on the whole earth, but Noah found favor in God's eyes. Noah was saved because of God's mercy. We never know when our lives will be over. If you don't know if God will have mercy on you when you die, or if you don't even know why God would need to, please read an article on my website called Of Sin and Salvation. It can be found within the topical guide section of the website. If you still have questions after reading the article, feel free to contact me using one of the methods found on the contact page of my website. My website is dynaglos.com. If you don't know how to spell Dynaglos, the word can be found at the bottom of the screen most of the time in these Bible study videos. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to my channel to see more like it, or, if you prefer, you can always find these videos and more on my website, www.dynaglos.com.